Hello, everyone. Let's go back a slide. We are looking at co-creation, engaging the process with audience response, and we've got some examples to go through today. What we would like you to do is, if you can go to vvox.app on your phone, on another web browser, tablets, whatever it might be, we thought we'd start using the audience response to kind of wrap up today, but where we, again, from all the things we've heard so far, what do you understand by a blended and connected approach? So I'll open it up. So if you go to vvox.app, they also have an app you can download if you want, but it does work just from a browser, as there will be a few bits that require your engagement last thing on a Wednesday afternoon, for which we do apologize. The code is 167844697, which you should see on the screen.
Tom, is this just a feature of the app, but it's basically doing it word by word? So
it's a word cloud. So basically, it will only take.
Okay, so don't write a sentence.
Yeah, if you want to do a sentence, do underscores in there. Sorry, I should have been more explicit with that. My fault. Now, for those that haven't used vVox before, obviously you can see the app on your phone and your device. I'm using this through PowerPoint. We'll be using sort of both the native system as well as the PowerPoint plugin. And as you can see on screen, I can see I've got 6 of 9 responses. So I'll give you another moment just to finish typing anything you want to type in.
If anyone's joined mine and Tom's joint sessions around audience response before, you'll know that I know very little about audience response compared to Tom. So I get to ask really stupid questions, which hopefully other people think sometimes. And so you said that you can see 6 of 9 responses. So in the back end of vVox, can you just see there have been 6 responses, or is it from 6 different respondents? I.e., if I put 2 comments in.
No, that would be... the 6 of 9 is not how many comments have come in, but 6 people from the 9 that have logged in have put something down, for which we can see here: responsive, communicated, mixed and mixed, bridging the gap, online, confusing, relational and flexible. So it's quite interesting, especially like Andy would say after this morning's SU one, where maybe the communication hasn't been to the students enough about how they need to engage with the process and what is expected of them through this process. So while it is flexible and we can add lots of different features for them, confusing may be something that comes out from this. So we're not spending too much time on that directly. But we did want to highlight from when we first started this, the principles of blended learning. And I'll pass this to Stuart now with that idea of the staff and student partnership centered side of things. And let me know when you want to move slides.
Will do. So this session, as Tom was just saying, is designed to understand a bit more about how co-creation can work practically. And actually, the sort of blended and connected environment that we're in is actually a bit of a boon for co-creation work, because it in some ways makes communicating with large groups not easier, but certainly more of the norm. And we put this slide up because these are the principles which I'm sure are familiar to most of you that underpinned the shift to the blended online, blended and connected learning. It's late in the afternoon. I need to put my teeth in. But obviously you can see the third one here is that learning is staff and student partnership centered. And that's can be quite a broad term. It can be one of those ideas which in the eye of the beholder, but to me, that centralizes this idea of co-creation, that to some degree, and co-creation is a continuum from doing a little bit with students to doing a lot in terms of redeveloping, designing aspects of teaching and learning. But this partnership approach means that we need to be collaborating with and communicating effectively with our students to better understand whether the approach we're taking is working and whether the approach that they're expecting is what they're getting. And there's a lot to be said around staff and student expectations maybe not always matching up, and it seems to have been a bit of a theme for me in the sessions I've been in today, actually, is that we sometimes assume what our students want or maybe what their expectations of us are. And actually, we thought it was important when we were developing these principles that collaborating with students, and on an institutional scale, that also means with the student union, to make it clear about why we're doing things, what they want. And that has some very practical, inclusive elements. Like there was a discussion earlier in the student union session around poverty, for example, like the devices, the internet access you've got. Consulting with students is important for this, but also explaining things like assessment design. In the Cracker Barrels earlier, there was a bit of a discussion about making sure that our teaching and learning is aligned effectively with our assessments, particularly if we've had to change those assessments due to COVID. And the best way to do this is to develop dialogue. Now, when I say co-creation to people, I often get a bit of a blank look, because usually when people hear co-creation, they're already bringing a bit of their own baggage to it. And sometimes that's based on scale. They think that if co-creation with students is going to be overhauling absolutely everything, it's or it's not so much about scale as it is about the extent of the co-creation, i.e. that the students are more in control and you lose the co-part. It's more students are creating their own learning rather than developing it with you. But actually, co-creation, while most of the practice that I work on, and I'm looking at those of you who I can see in the little box who I know do this kind of work, is more aimed at teaching and learning, it can be more broadly about the student experience. And a lot of the guidance around setting expectations for students is about developing those expectations with them. And that can extend to things like turning cameras on when you're in breakout rooms, for example, posting on discussion boards, so they know what they are. Drawing on a very specific example, we're going to walk you through how you can use VVox, but also what principles of co-creation you need to bear in mind to scale up co-creation to a large group. We're going to specifically focus on assessment criteria, but I'm going to try and unpack how that can apply in different areas throughout. Tom, I think that's enough on that slide. There should be a version of Zoom where you can both click the same thing through, but
well, you can on Google Slides, but obviously that doesn't plug into VVox, so yeah. Sorry about that. With your VVox app again, if you go back to your other browser or something, have you ever tried co-creation with your students before? And we've got yes, no, and unsure.
Hang on. Yes, I have. You can have it back in a minute.
Thanks, Andy.
All right. Oh.
So
I think you're allowed to dip out for a snack, Andy. You've been at this hard all day.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to call it there with 4 responses. So 50% have said yes, and 50% are either unsure or have said no. To the person that has put unsure, I'd be interested to ask why you are unsure.
It's me, so I haven't. But I could have put no, but I thought it'd be interesting. Sorry, Tom.
Thanks, Johnny. Stuart.
No, I'm not letting Johnny off the hook. I'm coming back for that, I'm afraid. So why do you think, what might you be unsure about, even if hypothetically?
Well, I guess I don't really teach students in that context. So, but I do teach, academics, or train academics on technologies, which I guess is a form of teaching. So, yeah, really to know if I think about it, but I was just trying to be a bit different, but it's failed massively, so sorry.
But
From a guy with hair that looks like a hedge, being a bit different for the sake of it is something I can relate to. So don't worry. I think your point about not co-creating because you don't work directly with students is a valid one. But the idea of co-creation, it's sort of in education, it comes from a few different places, and some of them are quite customer service driven. It's about having an approach which is collaborative to ensure that you're providing the right service. There's also a lot of quite left-wing philosophical arguments for why we should do this in education that's more liberating. But actually, I imagine the kind of work that a lot of the people in this room looking at who you are is more based around that, making sure we're doing the right thing. And I think it may not be co-creation with students, but I imagine the kind of work that you do is collaboratively with colleagues to ensure that it's fitting in the right area. Because as someone who also works in the center of obviously you're in a faculty, but in the center of the university, we need to be making sure that what we're doing is fit for purpose. So and events like this are one of the ways that we can do that. It's about creating dialogue. And as I said, we'll show you how you can do that a bit with VVox, particularly focused on students, but the principles are transferable to a number of different contexts about getting ideas, generating ideas, creating and developing new things, and then sharing them. Just because it underpins a bit of everything I've talked about so far, I'm a regular user of this quote from Broman and colleagues who I think sums it up quite nicely, that educators cannot assume that their curriculum design will be welcomed by students. And I think that is even more timely now than it would have been in 2015, because they're much further away from us. You don't have those more informal discussions with students around the classroom. You don't have those informal cues of knowing what's working. Like I say, most of you have your camera on, but I can still only see 5 people, including slightly off-puttingly myself. So I don't know how engaged everybody is. I'm not sure what I'm doing is definitely working, but we'll fix that by asking you in a minute. It's all clever and meta. Oh, look at that, Tom. We're so in sync. You just skipped exactly at the right time. Part of this is also that we don't know what our students don't know. So not only is it what Broman and colleagues were talking about, that co-creation is a way of addressing a gap that might exist between what we think students want and what they actually want. Co-creation is also a way of demystifying, pulling back the curtain of how teaching and learning works a little bit. And this link here, which we'll be able to see on the slides, or Tom, if you're very crafty, you can maybe stick in the chat, is to a video of some colleagues from Bournemouth University who engaged in some co-creation activity and their reflections about it. And it's quite telling how they talk about how even really engaged students didn't know some of the things that we really take for granted sometimes in teaching and learning. They didn't know how learning outcomes and assessment criteria are related to each other, for example, which from a quality assurance perspective, as well as just a curriculum design perspective, is a really fundamental aspect of teaching in higher education that this group of very engaged students were not aware of. So engaging in activities that design some of these elements or build on those elements for design brings students into our world, demystifies some of the language that we use. And obviously this is specifically around assessment, some of the more nuts and bolts parts of curriculum design, but you can substitute this for pretty much any aspect of teaching and learning. And that can apply for also bits of software or ways that we take particular approaches. So I'm thinking of things like the Moodle template or Moodle itself and how we engage with it. It's breaking down the taken for granted assumptions in a structured way so we can discuss with students around what they don't know, what they don't understand, and then also what's not working and what is working. And it's also worth saying that when I talk about co-creation with students, perhaps co-creation is not a useful label sometimes because it implies creation is necessary as an element of it. There's actually good co-creation processes can also just reinforce to you that what you're doing is working already, and therefore not changing things for the sake of it, not throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, but you are more reassured that you've got a strong understanding of why it's working. So if you're trying something new, I've suggested earlier that you probably need to check with your students that their understanding of it, their expectations of it are the same as yours. But that's not obviously always the case. People are brilliant at teaching without ever doing those sorts of things, but it lets you know maybe why it's working. So it's not just done on a hunch, or if it's based in literature, you know that it's working in your context. So what I'm trying to say is that co-creation is a process which there's no real rule book for, but can apply in pretty much any context. But we will show you a few steps that should work no matter what you're trying to achieve with co-creation, and Vvox as a tool to facilitate that. Tom, if you please.
So as Stuart said today, we're going to use Vvox because we have it at the university now, as well as Nearpod and Padlet. But the reason we're using this is because we can do it within the PowerPoint. We're also going to show you it in another kind of conversational way. But as Andy and Karen Ann in the earlier sessions showed with Padlet, there's a lot of things you can do to increase engagement and to sort of get the students involved in a myriad of ways. So obviously with audience response, there's lots of different ways you can go about it. And one of the main reasons for audience response is the anonymity side of it, where like Stuart mentioned, you know, I've got sort of 5 other people than myself who I can see on screen, and there are other people who have turned their camera off. And that again might be for a reason of not wanting to be seen or being afraid to get involved for whatever reason. And that again, that is fine, especially at the moment. But by using these sort of audience response tools, what we can do is get some feedback from people that maybe wouldn't normally speak up, and they can put something forward without the fear of like looking stupid. As like Stuart obviously made a joke about himself, I have no problem with making myself look stupid, and have done it on numerous occasions in front of, I think, most people here. But not everyone is like myself and Stuart, who don't mind sort of trying something and getting out there. They're more reserved with that, and that's fine too. So using an audience response system allows us to provide a forum for discussion. We're going to show you that through Vvox in a second using their chat feature. Vvox, very briefly, has a wide array of questions. And again, we've tried to use a few different ones. You saw the word cloud. We'll have some multiple choice stuff, and you can use that. You can also, with Vvox, which is really, really nice, is set up a survey after the fact. So essentially the room or the meeting that you create within Vvox, you can leave open. You can choose what to leave open to share. So you can turn the chat off, but leave the ID code live. And you can then set up surveys to get things after the fact. So you could do your session like this today and then co-create afterwards. It doesn't have to be as live, although we're going to do it in kind of a live discussional setting, as Stuart mentioned. So to the rationale of why we're doing these things, as you can see, we've got sort of a few statements, but as questions. What elements do you want defined through the process? So by doing co-creation, what is it you are trying to achieve? What do you want to find out? Stuart, should the students help shape the process?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because one of the challenges of co-creation is, I suppose, what is the starting point for it? And I think that maybe what Tom's alluding to here is that if you're developing a process to co-create with students, should that process itself be co-created with students? You could go down a bit of a rabbit hole with that sort of thing, but an element of that, of co-creation in that terms, could be the risk of sounding spurious, asynchronous co-creation based on feedback from students. Or it could be that you work with a smaller group of students to develop a process which you apply to a bigger group. You carrying on with this slide, or shall I finish that off?
If you carry on.
Okay. So we've got this idea here as well about authority, which I struggle with in a number of different ways. But the idea that the power for curriculum design or control of any element of teaching and learning or the student experience tends to lie with staff. And an important thing to ask yourself when you want to, and hopefully you will, engage in co-creation is how much of that are you willing to give up? How much do you want to give over to students? And that will help to shape the structure of whatever co-creation activity you engage in, because it might be that you want to essentially start with a blank canvas and say to students, we have a degree in engineering, let's make it together. I would caution against that, and I'll explain why in a minute, but I like what you're thinking. Your heart's in the right place, but you might also be thinking, well, I don't think it's appropriate that students are involved in designing assessment because it's our job to be assessing the quality of their work, but I'm quite happy to be flexible around the topics we include on a module. So having a dialogue with students around what those topics are, but then you're still saying the assessment is fine. And while co-creation obviously emphasizes student engagement, student involvement in the design process, it is always probably going to start with you, unless you have some particularly keen and perhaps activist students coming at you to say, we want to do this instead. And I've seen that happen, and it's great. But you can decide the shape of this co-creation and how you communicate it as well. And a lot of people are doing co-creation activity without necessarily labeling it in that way, or perhaps not even knowing they're doing it because they're just having a good dialogue with their students. But thinking about it in terms of co-creation and how much you're willing to bring the students into which areas can help you think about where you need to pay attention. And that can be driven by lots of different bits of evidence or what have you. And also by this other point that we've got on the slide, that thinking about why it matters that you've got the student voice will help you probably decide how much of it you want to, how much of your authority, for want of a better word, you want to give up. Because if you want to bring the student voice into this discussion because it's going to be pragmatically effective, then you probably want it to be quite targeted. If you want to do it because in the kind of critical pedagogy, or perhaps even more like ideas around decolonization, you want more authentic voice of the students to be in the fabric of a course, then you probably want to give up quite a lot of authority to make that more meaningful. And all of these things are sort of on a sliding scale. I think if we skip through the next few slides, Tom, because I think I'm just going to repeat myself. If we go to, let me see, 19, that's the one. So rather than listening to me waffle on about it, I thought we'd just get down to having a look at how it might work. And we're going to focus on assessment criteria as a particular area that you might want to... Bye, Johnny. Do enjoy the recording when you get a chance. Assessment criteria is an area that's possible to undertake this kind of co-created approach. This is quite a nice area to... what's loading there? I'll keep talking while you figure that out, Tom. Assessment criteria has got a nice area to co-create because it's quite well defined, although it takes quite a bit of bravery to bring students into the assessment process. And a lot of people I've worked with over the years who are quite confident in taking a co-created approach that somewhat balk at the idea of extending that to any element of assessment, even something like criteria. But there's quite a lot of research in this area now, and quote from Carlos we had a few minutes ago talks about how engaging students, thank you, Tom, with criteria and mapping this against performance and peers and understanding levelness is an effective way of ensuring that they understand those processes. And co-creating them goes a step beyond, because if you have a direct hand in making something, the depth of learning and experience you have is so much greater. If you go back to the next slide, please, Tom. So we've tried to boil down between us what we thought were 4 key steps that work for co-creation in many different circumstances. But it's worth saying that there isn't necessarily a hard and fast playbook that you should undertake for co-creation. And a lot of what counts as co-creation is just having good ongoing dialogue with your students. But if you've got a defined area, and we've got ours assessment criteria for this example, then starting with something predefined is usually the best bet, because a lot of people, when they first get bitten by the co-creation bug, they want to go a bit big bang. They want to do it with a blank sheet. They want to just design a whole degree from the ground up with some students. And again, fantastic. But I've also seen that crash and burn, because students need to be scaffolded to be able to engage with this process. As those colleagues from Bournemouth were saying in that video, which do go away and watch some other time, students don't necessarily understand the behind the scenes of what makes learning and teaching work, the more structural elements. And if we just get them to design things with a blank sheet of paper, then they're not necessarily going to know where to start. And that also applies for subject matter. So I've been talking specifically today about co-creating sort of the environment and the resources of teaching and learning, but co-creating subject matter, students don't necessarily know what they need to know. So I've said something predefined, and we'll show you our example here, but that can be quite a wide range of things. So it could be learning outcomes, for example. So you've got a course validated, but you want to design it, or you've got a module validated, you want to design it with students starting from learning outcomes. It gives them something to get a grip on, and they can start to unpack perhaps what they understand, what they don't understand, what topics they think would be unpacked there, what assessments fit with those learning outcomes. And you can be structuring these discussions around how you feel it should go and what you might do, and bringing your own voice to it as well. But something predefined is in the eye of the beholder. We'll use an assessment criteria in a minute, but it might be market research of other courses, for example, if you wanted to start from scratch. It might be an existing assessment. It might be an existing session on a topic. It might be a module handbook, but something which students can give some feedback on, can unpack, can unpick and critique a bit, is usually a good starting point to break down those areas where they don't necessarily understand, and to start to have more meaningful conversations, and to ensure that the ideas they're generating are relevant. Sort of roll step 1 and 2 in together there. So start with something predefined and get students to feed back on it. And this will generate areas that can be created. So if I pursue that learning outcome idea, so you've had a discussion with students about what they understand, what they don't understand, what topics they think will be taught around this, then that can start to be hammered out into something more concrete. It could be that you narrow it down to 5 or 6 areas you want to cover in a module, and have a discussion with students around which are the most important, which you may pay most attention to, which do they have prior knowledge of, what order is it. And I'm being quite necessarily broad and vague. We'll get specific in a minute, because I do want to emphasize that you can do pretty much anything as long as you're comfortable with it, with this kind of approach. And we finished off with the step of creating something new. So that might be, say, a list of topics that will be covered in a particular order on a module that has come from the learning outcomes. You've had a critical discussion with those learning outcomes with students, and then you've generated something from it based on their understanding. Now, in my head, I'm not sure if it's coming across to you, but I'm visualizing, as I'm saying this, sitting around a table with a group of, say, 5 or 6 students, which is probably typically how this kind of thing is done. I haven't sat around a table with anyone except my family since March, and we don't do a lot of co-creation in our household. So the way that this works is probably more effective in the new COVID blended and connected environment if you can be even more specific and perhaps a little bit less generative. But we're gonna show you how you can both get some broad feedback from big groups, but also have some discussions, so it can feel like it's creation and stepping beyond something like feedback. Tom, do you want to take us through this bit? Because I've got to sort.
So we wanted to sort of be a little bit more practical with it, to give you a feeling of how it would work from the student perspective. So we do have the RIT module marking criteria. If I zoom out a little bit, it doesn't. So it's broken down into structure, did it make sense, spelling and grammar, methods and methodology, critical analysis, and does the work help you inform your practice?
So just to go back a step. So this is a marking criteria that we use on a module that we teach on the academic professional apprenticeship. And this marking criteria is particularly tied to an assessment where our apprentices who will be doing a research project. So this is a marking criteria designed in order to reflect different elements of what a research project will look like. And the write-up for that project is an article for publication in a journal. So the idea is that the article has to be a good fit with the journal that they've picked, and also report effectively on the project. So it has to have things like a literature review, a methodology, what have you. Sorry, Tom, I cut across you.
No, that's it definitely needed the context. But this is the the marking criteria that we have as a basis, which actually was produced through a co-creation process with Stuart, as I was doing the course with him, studying it and writing the report. We as a class, again, sat around tables and discussed this, threw up ideas, which Stuart then put together into something new. However, I know that he's taken this and used it elsewhere with other groups to feed that on kind of as an iterative process. So what we wanted to do today was, again, just that. What I would have liked to do is maybe sort of distribute this to everyone. It doesn't matter too much today. That is the end. So I'm going to drag this over here. If we're back to Vivox, what I now have is the ability to allow you not to have to unmute yourself to take part in the discussion. What you can do is use the middle sort of speech bubble icons to add things to the chat. So again, what I will do is split the screen. If I load up the criteria again and put Vivox to the side.
Just put the criteria as a Google Doc into the chat so people can click on that now and you can see in more detail the elements of this marking criteria.
So what we've done is we have 5 questions that we would kind of ask to sort of start the ball rolling. I will open up the first one now, and again, I appreciate I'm not giving you necessarily much time to read it, but it's purely to kind of show you the process truncated into today's session. So I'm going to open the poll, and the question is, to what extent does the marking criteria effectively explain what your marker is looking for? Essentially, do you understand what you should be doing from that? So what you could get the students to do is log in. In this case, we've got a rating system. 1 would be they don't understand at all. 5 is I completely understand the marking criteria. And I can then start to see that the ratings are coming in.
So this is not much different to just gaining feedback on it. You've asked if something is working, but it's a useful starting point. And if we think back to those steps we were talking about, like getting feedback could be a good starting point for how you have these co-creation discussions with students. So we've given
last 3 digits, guys. Sorry.
Of the
link.
It is. They are
697,
167 844 697.
So we've given you something. You've got a tangible thing. You're hypothetically our students in this scenario, and then we've just asked you, essentially, does it do what it says on the tin? Is it a marking criteria, and is it one that will help you with your assessment? I mean, you can phrase this question in different ways for what you're trying to find out. It's not going to change the world. This is just feedback, as we say, but it's quite scalable to a large group. We're sort of rushing through things more as a demo than the actual process, but you can imagine using something like Vivox, you could send this around in advance. You could do it asynchronously, offline. You could do it in a session, and you could do it with a group of any size, because all you're doing is asking people to look at something. Does it do what you want it to do? Tell us on a scale from 1 to 5. So not so much co-creation yet, but an important step down the path towards co-creation that we know whether it's worthwhile. And if we got a room of 100 students and they all said, yes, 5, we strongly agree, this explains what we want, then we might go, okay, we'll leave that there then. I wouldn't recommend that. There's probably other ways that you can engage with the marking criteria, even under those circumstances. But what Tom's going to take you through now is like taking another step a bit towards that co-creation.
So, yeah, exactly. The question we've posed now is which area requires the most clarification, and it's on a scale of 1 to 6. So that relates there to the criteria. So which area, as a student, did you find most confusing? What area would you want to expand more and develop on? So again, people then type in their answer. I'm going to put in my answer and send that through, and you'll see it as live coming through here. Once you've got as many people as you think are actually engaging in the process, I can stop that, close the poll. Oh, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And now we're in trouble.
We hadn't planned for this, guys. Come on. In one respect, this actually shows that everyone is going to be stuck at certain points along the way. So you then need to unpack and again, with more time than we have, where that would work. But what you might find actually, where people are really have read it before, if you provided this the criteria before the session, you might find that it skews one way or another, and you can then focus that going forward.
But it's an important point to make, is that if it is genuine co-creation, you need to be somewhat prepared for the unexpected, and you need to be quite reflective and adaptable and open-minded about the kind of things that students might say. So I wrote that marking criteria and I thought it made sense, and you just all told me that it doesn't. I'm not hurt by that. I'll get over it and maybe spend some more time co-creating than I won't. I'm going to cry myself to sleep tonight. I'll spend more time co-creating than I initially had planned, because actually, rather than me thinking this needs a bit of a tune-up, I can maybe clarify 1 or 2 sentences. Actually, maybe this is a back to the drawing board scenario. So you do need to be reflective and reflexive and a bit open-minded when you're doing this. So it might not be a quick win that you're like, well, quick 10 minutes in and out, we've done some co-creation. Although if that's what you want, then it is about defining the boundaries neatly. You might not be willing to overhaul from the ground up, in which case you don't want to entertain that, and that will change the questions that you ask. It might be that you have a hunch the section about structure is the weakest or the least clear, so you just unpack that one. Sorry, Andy, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, be fair to yourselves, Stu. You didn't give us a 7, which was they're okay.
Yes, that's a very good point. and again, that's I emphasized that point earlier, and then we haven't carried it over into our exercise. And actually, the co-creation might just be showing that everything's fine. I'm not actually worried about this. I'm hamming it up because it's late in the afternoon. I've gone a bit bonkers. But hypothetically, if we assume that a particular area was more popular, then we could unpack that, and that might be something more discursive. And Tom's going to talk us through a bit of how we could do that now.
Yeah. So we've put up the what is unnecessary. Now, again, truncating this process. This is a free text answer. You could get the student to post in, and I've put one in, and someone else very kindly did it. Someone's put one. I've put labeling in terms of this. It was the, I don't think that tables and figures need to be clearly labeled. I think that's it doesn't need to be so explicit, but you can get them to add a comment. So where the word cloud we did at the beginning of the PowerPoint, like we saw, only allows 1 word, this allows for more sentences or for a greater in-depth answer.
Did you reopen that, Tom, so we can put some sentences in?
Yeah.
You've moved on to the next one anyway, which is
that's right.
Structure, I believe.
That's a nice feature of Vvox, is what I can do is open and rerun something I've already run. So if it didn't complete the answer you wanted, I can rerun that question and get people to do it again. That's all right, James. You go. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. So I'm not saying we have to run that one again properly, but I wanted to use my useful idiot point of making that you can reopen these things and return to them, which I think is quite good about Vvox. It feels like it flows quite naturally when you're doing these things, and there are lots of different question types. You might not get flowing passages of prose here, but there is an open text. Is there a word or character count on that, Tom, that you know?
Not that I know of, but again, you probably wouldn't want it to be too much, but equally you may use that more in like the survey design side of it after the fact.
But again, you can start to see how this gets a bit of a richer feedback. It's still very much feedback. It's trying to get it broken down in a way that feels more like qualitative data. For example, it's you're asking the students to expand on areas, and you don't have to take this as a gospel that you have to do these steps, but starting with something which lets them voice their concerns or what they like or don't like is a good way of doing it. Someone likes the process. Thank you.
We used questions to specifically sort of do this, and I'm not going to go through all of the ones that we've missed for now. But what you might want to do, like we were talking about the anonymity side of things, is just using the question and answer feature of Vivox. So again, if you go back to your app, the middle sort of tab, which is just like two speech bubbles, as it were, it's like the overlay, just the speech icons. I've got this set up at the moment, so question and answer is on, and there is no moderation. So that could be dangerous, but what you could do is, where we're asking these questions, rather than doing them and trying to fit them in with the tool, you could just have the chat feature here, where people throw ideas up that you as the academic and then the creator can then start to discuss and talk about. So those people that don't want to maybe unmute themselves or say something, they can just use this, and you can start feeding that to a centralized document, which again, when we did the actual sort of creation of that Word document that we showed you and Stuart shared in the chat, there was, I don't know, about 15 of us in the room, and there was definitely sort of 4 or 5 of us who were more vocal than others in what we thought about the process, and there are some people who are obviously more relaxed to just let it kind of, just to be there in case they want to say something, but they'll stay quiet. Head above the parapet, you can post it anonymously here, and as you can see, I've got it displaying sort of by most liked, so that we can rank the points and answer those questions off. I think Joe,
this depends on
face, is asking you for style tips.
What you do, Joe, is you get up as early as you can, you find the thorniest hedge, and you just dive headfirst into there and pull it straight back out again, and you end up with this. It's all natural.
I didn't start that, by the way. That was me, Stu, sorry.
Oh.
I was going to keep quiet then, Joe, but I thought it. Thanks.
Well, anyway, now you all know my secret, whoever is instigated to this. But obviously, this depends on the kind of questions you ask. So we haven't asked any questions here. We're just sort of showing how the Q&A works. And that's going to be structured around perhaps the previous things you've been asking, perhaps the specific, what do they call it, predefined element that you've introduced. So in our case, the marking criteria. And this can start to facilitate that more generative bit. So we want to be moving from just feedback to creation. So this might be a good opportunity in a Q&A, which you can respond to, and which, as Tom is saying, can be anonymous, to start to come up with things. So a question which you frame, which then might go into the Q&A, might say things like, what do you believe should go in the structure element of the criteria? So you're asking specific questions which get ideas from the students. So you're moving towards that creation, and the scalability of that and through Vivox is quite high, as long as the students are engaged. But the cleanliness, is that how you would say, of the interface is one of the things that helps with that. Vivox is one of those tools which I think it feels like other tools that you use, other apps that you use, where some educational apps they don't. And I think that's one of the things I like about it. So I'm glad that someone's flagged that up, and it can be useful for having these discussions, because it sort of just works and it looks good while it's doing it.
The nice bit, I think, for me, like, is as you say, the fact that it's clean on this kind of, when you're using it to present interface, if you're doing dialogues this way, it's got the fact you can ask specific questions if there's something you want to specifically target. But there's also that bit of, I don't want to use this, I just like PowerPoint and want to add it into a PowerPoint to get some feedback while I'm halfway through my session. You can use the PowerPoint plugin and do it there. So you can basically approach it from whichever way suits you, but still get that engagement from the student. And again, this could be the other bit we haven't gone over today, which isn't really part of the session, but you can also use this like you would do a quiz tool. So basically you can have a leaderboard. So you could use it for the sort of gamification as well, but we're doing it in the CoCreation element. But the nice bit is it's flexible for lots of different reasons. So does anyone have any other sort of specific questions of either of the tool or for CoCreation for us? we are down to the sort of people we know very well now. So
yeah, so we are running out of time, but
and we are running out of time.
This,
So, yeah.
everything we've done is sort of just try to get you thinking about how VVox can facilitate different kinds of discussions. And I think that the kinds of quizzes that Tom's talking about are still great, of course, but they're fairly well worn territory now. Whereas actually, this is showing that you can start to get something which feels a bit more dialogic going. It's a sort of ongoing engagement, which might remove the need for changing between different tools and getting that kind of technology fatigue that you get going. But obviously, as I was sort of alluding to, what we've done here isn't strictly co-creation. What we've done is lay the groundwork for co-creation. What then needs to happen is that makes something new. In our case, that would be that this Q&A was a bit more generative. I was asking for ideas on particular topics, and then either went away and made something, or you could use collaborative tools to produce a document live with students. And you can imagine this applies to lots of different areas. But specifically for the assessment criteria, it might be that we had something that we could all work on, so different people could contribute ideas, or that ideas were lifted from the Q&A or what have you and put straight into the document. So you're making something new. And this is something which can be useful, for example, as I was saying, for setting expectations. So this might be using VVox in this way, might be a good way of broaching topics which have run throughout the day around things like engagement in discussions, having videos on. So if people don't want to say that they don't want to have their video on, but you can still ask a whole group of people and they can respond anonymously and maybe say, no, I don't want to for whatever reason. But where these tools can be used in a more ongoing dialogic way, you can also emphasize the importance of particular areas, and that comes into how you frame the questions, and that goes back to that sort of step process we were talking about earlier. And I think Tom was trying to get you guys to say something and I jumped in and waffled. So
No. I think that's a perfect point to kind of just say, though, where you as the academic are trying to be dialogic and not ignore them and worry about recording stuff. Basically, because VVox is a tool under the data tab, everything we've done today is there. You don't have to think about it while you're doing. You can focus on just asking the questions, just having that dialogue with the students, and then pull it all out later and basically download data report, which will have all your polls, your question and answer, everything there, so that you can then take it and do that part that Stuart's talking about of recreating something from what you started with.
Okay, we're running out of time rapidly. Any questions, thoughts, comments, sharing of good practice? Joe and I have the same bookcase behind us, it seems. That's my thought for that. Andy?
The only thing I would say, I often find that people are doing this and they don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand what co-creation is. And it's just, oh, yeah, I've been doing that for years. Really, that's exactly what it is. And it's just, again, it's just having that sense, isn't it, of what it actually means. And I have to say, I love it because you do too. We all do. But you get some of the best stuff out of it when the students feel they have ownership of it. And I did that. So it's like a bit like Bad Robot. I made that. When you look at the NSS criteria as well, and you have that score about my recommendations and my thoughts are taken on board and I'm impacting it, this is a great way to reinforce those areas of scores where we often get a real hit.
I think that's a really good point, Andy. And part of the rationale of doing this is that we want to raise the profile of the idea of co-creating, I suppose, because as you say, a lot of people are doing it already. I think we alluded to, because it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, about the importance of how you frame your questions, but around things like the NSS or other core metrics might be one of the ways you do this, but not in a transactional, we're just going to ask NSS questions in a different way, but using the terminology. So students are used to understanding the kind of language that goes into the NSS, for example, and exploring those ideas. So, because years ago, I used to do quite a lot of work on the NSS, and some of the biggest problems is that students just didn't understand what we meant when we were saying particular things around the questions. And
just quickly to say, if you do have any questions about this going forward, please do get in contact with any of us to ask after that, because again, like everyone said, it's been a long day with a lot to take in. Sometimes you need to have a day or two to process it before you can even think about what you want to do going forward.